Welcome to another show of New Hampshire Citizens for Progress. Our show today is going to be on, we're in the middle of a pandemic. The full economic consequences of this event have yet to be felt. The last stimulus was passed in March. Where are we now? What's going to happen? Nothing? Something? A little bit of something? A lot of something? Well, what can we expect? And how can we deal with this? So I'd like to introduce one of our guests, Joe Firestone.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Okay, so I'm Joe Firestone. I'm a live streamer. I'm a writer. I have a PhD. I'm a political science PhD. I've been studying politics, and economics for a very long time. I'm not going to say how long because I'm a little shy about my age at this point. Okay, but anyway, I've got something like, I know a lot about the MMT area, of economics, specifically macroeconomics, a little bit also when it comes to microeconomics. I'm very focused on fiscal responsibility and fiscal policy. But my brand of fiscal responsibility is real fiscal responsibility, not the faux fiscal responsibility, which we see around us now all the time.
Okay. We have another guest here with us live in the studio, Chris Herbert. He does a show here as well. Chris.
Well, I think, anybody who's watching the TV show would recognize me, but I'm a state rep. Won re-election for my fourth term. My degree was in just a journalist degree. I'm a reporter by trade, print reporter. But I've always had an interest in macroeconomics. I took some basic macro and micro when I was at UNH. And it's always something I've been interested in. And the older I've gotten, the more interested I've gotten into it. And as a result of my curiosity, I basically learned all of my macroeconomics from Bill Mitchell, an Australian economist, who I had the good fortune to meet him once. But I listened to him 4 or 5 times a week, and he talks about the various issues that we would be interested here.
Okay, and Joe, you live stream multi social media events on. I think it's 9 o'clock East Coast time. On what days?
It's Tuesday through Thursday and Saturday. I have a 9 p.m. show on Facebook. I load it up to video. A few hours later, I have a YouTube channel for that, and I also do progressive short takes, which are videos. And I do those, at irregular times. I usually have about 5 to 6 of them each week, as well as the in-depth shows. The in-depth shows run anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours.
So with this pandemic, states and federal governments can deal with this differently. And what can be done for us to get past what could be the worst economy that we've ever experienced in our lifetime?
Well, MMT says that you have to use your fiscal tools in order to pump money and spending down into the private economy, and you have to do it to a level that allows you to replace the lack of spending that the Depression caused. So you basically have to fill a hole in. And the better you fill it and the more intelligently you use that money, the more effective it's going to be. And fortunately for us, Congress creates new money every time it pays a bill. So paying the bill is not the problem. What we have to figure out is which bills do we want to pay and how effective will they be when we do that. So that's how MNT says.
It also seems that they try to say that with the deficit what it is, that we don't have this money to spend, and they promote what's referred to as austerity, to cut the spending to match the income. Is this something that works?
No, and the reason why, it doesn't work is because when you cut the spending of the government, you deprive the private sector of financial resources which it needs in order to do the spending. So the private sector, particularly the lower level people in the private sector, the not so rich people, have to spend in order to boost up the economy, in order to raise sales in the economy, to drive the businesses to produce. So in this case, it's demand which is the key, sales which is the key. And you don't get sales when the working people in the economy don't have the money to spend. So you have to level things out. You have to provide working people with the financial resources that they need to spend.
Well, it seems like we do it kind of bass-ackwards then, huh? Because the stimulus mostly was for businesses and very little went to the people that were working. That's not the way some other countries did it. Other countries gave the people the money to be able to pay the bank. Like, let's choose rent for an example. The banks typically own the housing property. A landlord or the homeowner has that property, and they have to pay the bank. If you bail out the person and give them the money, they can either pay the bank or pay the landlord, who can then pay the bank. It looks like they kind of skipped that step of giving the people the money and gave the banks the money straight away.
Yeah, what some of the other countries did is they replaced the payroll, actually. They guaranteed the payroll. Okay, so people could remain attached to their businesses. And so that was a real key for lifting the economy or maintaining it in place, okay, in other countries. Now, they've had some depression as well, but nowhere near, okay, what we've had, because the people are still connected to their jobs. So they were basically, through this means, they were guaranteeing their jobs, and they were keeping the payroll actually flowing to people. We did it, okay, another way. We had unemployment insurance, and for a while we paid people, okay, expanded unemployment, which did some good things, but it didn't keep people attached to their businesses. And meanwhile, the businesses were going out of business more and more and more, and by now, hundreds of thousands of businesses have simply disappeared. And that's been actually primarily true in the small business sector, okay, of the economy of the United States. Those small businesses are not going to be coming back. So we're going to have to replace the small business losses with new small businesses. And we're not going to be able to do that without jacking up the demand from people. So people will go into business again because they'll have a perception the demand is there, they can make a profit.
The MMT, one of the planks in the framework of MMT is a national job guarantee. And so MMT is always striving to have full employment. So if you get a recession like this where people get thrown out of work for whatever reason, the Congress can fund, is similar to what you just said, Mr. Firestone. They can put you to work and pay you. And as a result of that, you don't get these 15, 20% unemployment rates that we get during the Depression. So unemployment is a political choice that Congress makes. If we had a national job guarantee, it would always be full employment. And that's a much more efficient way of handling recessions instead of having people getting thrown out on the street and then they have to go sign up for welfare, which is not poverty. And MMT says, no, we have a national job guarantee. If you want to work and you're able to work, we'll get you a job that will pay well.
Yes, in fact, what MMT specifies is that it should be a job at a living wage.
Socially acceptable level.
Right, with good fringe benefits.
Yep.
Okay, and so that really is a replacement of the job, and also it's a de facto minimum wage. In other words, if we have a situation where, for example, we institute a job guarantee, okay, and the minimum wage, as I like to think of it, is, let's say, $15 an hour in the lowest cost area of the United States, which, in my proposal, would be cost adjusted for all of the other areas, so that, for example, okay, in New York City or Los Angeles or San Francisco, okay, the minimum wage on the federal job guarantee might go as high as $30 an hour. Okay, now this is not a proposal, okay, for all the MMTers. We vary in this, but this, okay, is actually my particular proposal, because what a living wage means in different places, okay, it's different. It's going to depend on the cost of living, okay, in those cases. So I take very seriously the idea that it should be a living wage for the federal job guarantee. Then this constitutes a de facto living wage, which the private sector businesses have to meet, because if they don't meet that living wage, they won't be able to get any people to work for them. So this is going to result in a lifting of the economy of the United States. It's going to be a much more active and vibrant economy, and the degree of equality in the economy will be greatly increased if we instituted a federal job guarantee.
There also is another aspect to the job guarantee which I like, and that is that you define what resources are idle and are available to buy. Now, when there's a recession and people are unemployed in great numbers, that's idle labor that is there and it's a resource and it's not being utilized. So Congress steps in, gives all those people work to do, and as a result of that, you have full employment and no inflation, because you're using an idle resource. So every time MMT wants to go and do a policy change or something that Congress wants to do, they first identify, are the resources there to buy? Now, it's an easy question to answer when there's a huge recession. That's labor. Labor is one of the most important resources we have, obviously. So if they're all idle, you put them to work, it is not inflationary. And so that's, MMT is in fact the only macro that addresses inflation directly. It's a critical component of their understanding of what is able to be financed. And so you first look at resources that are available. If they're idle and you can pick them up and put them to work, you do it. And it's not inflationary.
Right, okay. And the important thing is that you pick them up in the sectors where the resources are available. So it not only has a macro component to it, it has a micro component to it also.
Right.
Okay, because if you overspend in certain sectors of the business world, you can easily get a situation where you will have inflation in those particular sectors, which can then spread, okay, to other sectors. We saw this during the 1970s, where inflation began and was concentrated in the energy area, okay, because the Saudis were raising the prices, okay, of oil tremendously, and then that was spreading to other sectors, okay, of the economy, creating a general inflation at the same time that we had a stagnation. Okay, so we had a stagflation. We had a situation that for the economists was really a problematic one to figure out. We had stagnation, okay, and unemployment, which was fairly high, but inflation was getting out of control too. And so that was a problem they had a hard time actually figuring out. And the way they figured it out was to bring interest rates up high until the economy finally crashed. And we had a serious recession at the end of the Carter period, okay, and at the beginning, okay, of the Reagan period.
The interesting thing about that segment in time is the fact, well, there's a couple interesting things, but what I noticed was that you got a sort of you had an embargo, so there was an artificial limitation of a resource, oil. And as a
Yes.
result of that, the prices went up because there was an artificial austerity imposed on our system by OPEC. They wouldn't sell us the oil. And as a result of that, that created a lot of bottlenecks, and we got stagflation and inflation at the same time, recession and inflation at the same time. And the monetary cure was to jack the interest rates up to like 20%, and it crashed the economy. MMT,
Right.
MMT is a
Very
fiscal
interesting
tool.
thing. There was a very interesting thing that happened then. I was in a private business then. Okay, it was actually a computer business, hardware business, and the way we handled the stagflation is we just adjusted to it. In other words, we absorbed the costs and increased the sales, and the interest rates on credit kept on going up, increasing. And we adapted, though, for quite some time. And the economy was doing well in the middle of the inflation. But then it finally reached a certain point where the burden of the interest rates was so high that people had to stop on the supply side, and they had to stop on the demand side also, because demand wasn't strong enough, because the federal government was trying to do everything it could to stop the inflation. So Carter was cutting back on the deficit spending. So people actually weren't having the money either. So businesses were getting it from two sides. Okay.
Yeah, Carter didn't understand how the system works, and they still don't understand how the system works. MMT actually describes how we do spend today. It's not news, but we've been kept in the dark, so to speak. I mean, Congress, based on the resources, does not need taxes. It doesn't need to borrow money. It doesn't need to raise taxes, I guess I should say, because it creates the money when it pays a bill. That's how it's been done since we went off the gold standard in 71? When we went total fiat currency. So
yeah, that's certainly true.
A lot of people make it appear or sound as though MMT is something revolutionary and brand new. But in fact, the operational mechanisms of how Congress funds its spending is exactly what MMT uses. So it's very difficult for people to make the transition and realize that this is how we've been funding our federal government since 1971. Now, there are other issues. In other words, the debt, right, which they always scare you with, public debt. And the problem there is most of that debt is not needed because it's not integral to funding congressional spending. In other words, we don't have to issue treasuries in order to spend money. That's when people start to get lost and they go, I don't understand that. And as a result of that, we have presidents who don't understand it, and it's kind of scary when you realize they haven't learned it yet.
Yeah, there are a few reasons why they don't comprehend it. Okay, that is, but first of all, the way we deal with our state, and local governments, they do only get money by taxing, and by borrowing or by selling property, or something like that. So they have to go through those things, to actually create money. But they are the users of the currency. The federal government, is the issuer of the currency. So the federal government doesn't have to only borrow, and tax. However, the funny part of this particular situation is that the propagandists, in Washington, the network, of Peterson allies, and the foundations, the Peterson foundations, have been propagandizing for years to try to convince people that the only way the federal government actually gets money is by taxing and by borrowing. when the federal government doesn't get money in that way at all. It does pay tax, okay, and it borrows. But in the act of settling the revenues from taxing, okay, and borrowing, the Federal Reserve actually destroys the revenues and creates entirely new reserves for the Treasury spending account. And it's those reserves which are spent into the economy by the Treasury Department. It's those reserves that do the deficit spending. It's those reserves that do all the spending, whether there's taxing to offset it or whether there's no taxing to offset it. The Federal Reserve is always creating but new money for the Treasury. But that also brings up a distinction. While it's true that Congress appropriates money and that it eventually is that money which the Treasury is spending into the private sector, it's also true that in doing the appropriation, Congress itself is not actually creating the money. The reason why is it's delegated creation of the reserves, but to the Federal Reserve. So it's ultimately the Federal Reserve that has to top up the balances in the Treasury spending account. And so that gets us back to the question is, when does the Federal Reserve actually top up the Treasury spending account so Treasury can spend the congressional appropriations? Okay, and the conventional people have been insisting that it only tops up the Treasury spending account after tax revenues are deposited, okay, and after the revenues from the sale of debt instruments happen to be deposited. And that's the only time it happens. And that may be true in terms of custom, may be true in terms of practice, but it's not something that's necessitated by the Constitution, not something that is necessitated by the powers Congress has granted to the executive branch. For example, one power which the executive branch has, okay, at present, is to mint platinum coins, okay, and the Treasury Secretary can specify the face value of a platinum coin. So the Treasury Secretary, in theory at least, okay, they've never done this, of course, they could specify a platinum coin that has a face value of $1 trillion, or $2 trillion, or $5 trillion, okay, or $100 trillion. And if that coin were deposited at the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve would then have a trigger which would require it to place $100 trillion into the Treasury spending account. In other words, to mark up the spending account by $100 trillion. If that were to happen, the Treasury spending account would be filled with enough money to last for 10 to 15 years, both in terms of paying off the federal debt we have now and also in terms of spending the appropriations, okay, of Congress. So that is one way to get money into the Treasury spending account without having to tax, okay, to borrow. But there's even a more simpler way. And the more simpler way is that Congress, when it writes an appropriation bill, can simply put two short paragraphs, which are actually two short sentences. In other words, each sentence is a paragraph, which would order the Federal Reserve to place the money necessary to spend an appropriation and to pay back all the debt that falls due during the period of the appropriation. And it can order the Federal Reserve to do this in just these two paragraphs that can be added to appropriation bills. This is called overt congressional financing, OCF. It's never been used by the federal government yet.
Now you just lost everybody, Mr. Firestone.
Yes, I probably lost everybody, but I think I did drive home the point that the federal government is able to fill the Treasury spending account other than through borrowing and taxing.
Right.
And that's the point, okay, that I wanted to make, because that's the basis for the austerity claims. What the Austerians are doing, okay, is they are claiming we can only borrow so much, we can only tax so much. So this limits our spending, and the federal government can even get to insolvency. It can run out of money. And it isn't true that it can run out of money. That's a falsity, because Congress can do these other things, and the executive branch can do these other things to fill up the Treasury spending account.
Can I
So-
just jump in? One item, when you mentioned the two sentences, that's not well known, but the fact of the matter is there are some areas of federal spending that those sentences are there. By law, they have to be funded. I think part of the Medicare program falls under that law. But you know what doesn't? Social Security.
It does, Chris. I was agreeing with you. A part of the Medicare program falls under that simply because the congressional appropriation for each year, okay, is guaranteed, okay, in the year before that.
Right.
If I run this into a nutshell, it's really the state governments can't raise the funds without the taxes to be able to prevent our economy from crashing and make sure all the services and things available in the state continue. It's the federal government that has the ability to do this. You need to contact your legislators and let them know that we need a people's bailout, and they need to make sure that they protect our economy in the best way possible.
Okay, to find some of my writings, okay, and the books, okay, I've written 7 books, okay, on MMT. All you need to do is go to my website, josephmfirestone.com, and you can find various things there, okay, resources there. For my live streams, okay, I have a Facebook page, a live stream, okay, my Facebook page. The Facebook page, okay, is Let's Get It Done. So search, okay, for Let's Get It Done, and you should be able to find me. And then the YouTube page is Joseph M. Firestone, and so you can search for that, and you can get me, okay, on YouTube.
I'm on the TV from 6 to 7 tonight, every Thursday. I talk about MMT and a lot of local politics because I'm a state rep and I've been an alderman. So it's not all finance. But if you want to read something that's easy to read, and Stephanie Kelton is an economist, and she has written a book called The Deficit Myth. And I swear you will not have a problem understanding what she's saying. We have a lot of deficits. Money's not one of them.
Well, I want to thank you all for tuning in and watching. I hope you are curious about some of these things, because in the position we're in, it's really important that we understand at least the basics of this. So thank you. Be safe, be healthy, and see you next week.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.